In the Lesson 5.6 example, How Can You Interpret ITBS Vocabulary Scores, we'll practice using the 68, 95, 99.7 rule. The random variable x is the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, or ITBS, vocabulary score of a randomly selected Gary, Indiana 7th grader, and it can be modeled by a normal distribution with a mean mu equals 6.84 and a standard deviation sigma equals 1.55. Let's use the 68, 95, 99.7 rule to approximate a few probabilities. First, let's find the probability that x is less than 3.74. Now, in any of these problems, the first thing you want to do is to draw a picture of the normal probability distribution, a nice bell-shaped curve, with the mean and the points 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations above and below the mean clearly labeled. So in this case, our mean was 6.84, and we'll add 1.55 a few times to get 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations above, and then from that 6.84, we'll subtract 1.55 a few times to get 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations below. Next, you want to make sure you clearly shade the area under the normal density curve that corresponds to the probability you want. We want the probability x is less than 3.74, so we'll shade to the left of 3.74 on this curve. Now, why do I have all of this shaded in blue? Well, that's because we note that the boundary, or the cutoff point here, happens to fall 2 standard deviations below the mean. And we know a nice fact about normal distributions from the 68, 95, 99.7 rule that says that about 95% of scores are going to fall within 2 standard deviations of mu. So because I know that 95% of scores fall within this blue shaded region, that must mean that the other 5% of scores fall outside that region, either more than 2 standard deviations above or 2 standard deviations below. Now, because we only want this region down here, we'll take that 5% and divide it by 2. By symmetry, we can just chop that in half, and we see that about 2.5% of scores will fall in this range. So the probability that x is less than 3.74 will be 0.025. Next, let's find the probability that a randomly selected Gary 7th grader gets an ITBS vocabulary score between 5.29 and 9.94. So on our normal curve, we shade between 5.29 and 9.94. We want this entire shaded region. Now again, we note that some boundaries happen to fall 1 and 2 standard deviations away from the mean. First, we note that about 68% of the scores will fall between 5.29 and 8.39. Next, we have to add the percentage of scores that fall between 8.39 and 9.94. To find that, we'll note that about 95% of scores fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean. And we can use that fact to find this area because we know that the amount of scores falling in this area and this area between 1 and 2 standard deviations away from the mean is about 27%. That's 95 minus 68. By symmetry then, we can take 95 minus 68%, that 27%, and divide it by 2 to find that 13.5% of scores will fall between 8.39 and 9.94. Therefore, the probability that x will be between 5.29 and 9.94 is equal to 68% plus 13.5%, or 0.68 plus 0.135, for a total of 0.815, or 81.5% of scores. For some additional practice using the 68, 95, 99.7 rule, try exercise 1.